apologies because everyone is here. Declaration of members' interests. Members are obliged to declare any relevant financial or other interest. Does anybody have any interest to declare?
No.
No, if not, then we will pass on then to the draft minutes of the meeting held on the 29th of June. So I refer to members to the draft minutes of the meeting which was held on the 29th of June, which is at pages 6 to 10 of the meeting pack. And I appreciate there's been a few changes in terms of membership, including myself, in relation to that. But for those members who were present on the 29th, are they happy with or content with the minutes?
Yep, Chair. Just to register on that, yes, I'm marked as being there, but I had some technical difficulties in terms of accessing that meeting on that day and hearing some of the stuff, but just to have that registered, happy enough with it as it stands.
Robbie, we'll register that, okay. Matters arising, I think any matters arising are covered by other items on the agenda. So we move to the main item, which is the report of the review of opposition entitlements, consideration of written responses. I refer to the Secretariat briefing paper at 5.1, which is pages 13 to 14 of the pack, which has been provided for background information, and I invite the clerk to speak to the paper.
Okay, Chair. So just to remind members that at the last meeting on the 29th of June, the committee received its oral briefing from Trevor Rainey on his review of the Statement of Entitlements for an official opposition. And at that meeting, the committee agreed, in line with the terms of reference for the review, agreed to write to the Procedures Committee and also the Assembly Commission to take their views on the report recommendations in terms of procedures and finance, respectively. And also, at that meeting, the committee agreed to write to the Assembly parties and independent MLAs for their views on the recommendations from Trevor Rainey as well. So those invitation letters went out on the 6th of July to the party leaders and copied to the whips, and then in September there was a reminder was issued in early September. There were 3 responses received, one from the Commission, one from the Procedures Committee and one from Sinn Féin, and they are in the pack at items 5.4, 5.5 and 5.6, pages 120 to 132 for members to note. So the committee now, in accordance with the terms of reference for the review, the committee now needs to consider the recommendations from Trevor Rainey and to report to the Assembly on its considerations of the findings and recommendations. And to assist the committee in that work, the Secretariat have produced a working draft, the first kind of working draft of a committee report, which is included in the packet, page 19. The background section of the report starts at page 19 of the pack. And members will see there that under each of the 18 recommendations from Trevor Rainey, we've summarised the 3 responses that have been received under the applicable headings. There are also prompts for the committee in terms of the decisions which it will require to make in relation to each of the recommendations. So, Chair, that's just the background. In terms of formal decisions, then for the committee would be at the meeting on the 20th of October.
Just in terms of procedure so far, does anybody have any questions for the clerk? Next, what he's just said. Okay, if not, as indicated, I think, by the clerk, we're not today making a formal agreement on the Trevor Rainey's recommendations. That's not required today, and I appreciate there will be there may be some areas where parties may want to reserve their position. However, the aim would be actually that we could then agree formal position at the next meeting on the 20th. I think what would also be helpful as the staff are developing the draft report, if there are any indications of views on each of the recommendations informally, that would give a sense of where members' views are at this stage. So members are aware that in terms of the 18 recommendations, they're essentially broken down into 4 categories: the general, procedural, the financial, and also then access to information. So I think it would be helpful if we considered the 18 recommendations broken down to those 4 groups, and we took them then in turn. So the first set recommendations 1 to 5 are general recommendations. They're largely centred around the adequacy and effectiveness of the entitlements available to official opposition, and they're on pages 22 to 25 of the pack. So I'll ask members if they have any views on those recommendations 1 to 5.
No.
I mean, I appreciate a lot of this is not overly novel in its nature. Okay.
I think, Chair, those are fairly uncontroversial, Chairman.
Yeah, I think that's probably correct in that regard. Okay, we'll move on then to, which is obviously particularly would be the source of scrutiny by the Procedures Committee. In terms of then the next batch, which is at 6, recommendations 6 to 11 are related to procedural matters. They're on pages 25 to 30 of the pack. So I'll throw it open then if members have anything they want to say on the procedural issues at 6 to 11. Yes, Kelly.
I think that it throws up if we have an opposition that has more than one party, where it says in question time, the first supplementary question, how will that be dealt with if we have more than one party in that official opposition? Will that official opposition then designate not a leader, but, you know, one representative? Or will there have to be, say, for instance, if there's 2 or more parties, the first supplementary questions then would be for those?
I mean, I would think if the recommendation is for the first question to be by the official opposition and be by the leader of it, I suppose whether that is then in procedure set down as the largest party gathered within the opposition, or whether that is some form of arrangement. For example, if you have 2 or more parties that are in that arrangement between themselves, I don't think it could be in a situation where there's, if you've got 2, 3, 4 parties together, there'd be a constant sort of biting of the cherry in that regard. Jerry, I think you wanted to...
It strikes me that's something for them to work out themselves. I mean, it's probably the fairest way to do it. We don't know who would be in it. Whoever's in it then need to work that out. But I mean, I suppose the main point is that it is one person. In other words, it has to be one person. It could also be that it changes. Yeah. So if the opposition are a number of parties, they could decide someone does it one day and someone does it another day. I think the issue procedurally might be that there's knowledge of that beforehand. It's the logic to me anyway, so for what it works.
I think Colin will do.
Chair,
oh, sorry.
Chair, I believe the answer to that one is in recommendation number 4, where the official opposition comprises more than one party, that the parties involved should develop and publish operating procedures for their voluntary grouping in relation to business in the Assembly. So it's a good question by Kelly, but I think recommendation 4, if we were to accept the recommendations there, that would cover that one.
Yeah, Chair, I must say I think it's a matter of self-regulation in the opposition.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes the nature of these things, Jim, is that we've a bit of a tendency to over-engineer solutions in that regard on it, I think as well. But Colin and then Militia.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose it was just about the reliance on oral questions of it just being the supplementaries that are given to the opposition that really maybe, I suppose it would be our preference that there would be a mechanism to allow the opposition to actually ask the first series of questions, because the lottery system could be such that you could end up in an oral question session where hypothetically all 15 questions could be allocated to executive-based members and none could go to the opposition. And if you're only allowing the supplementary, it means that the opposition aren't getting to set what the question is, they're only getting to set what the supplementary to that question is. But unlikely to work out that way in reality, but it is a hypothetical that all 15 questions to a minister could be from executive-based members, which...
Yeah, others, is that on that point, Jerry?
Well, just on that point, I think the system as it sits is democratic to all members, and they have the opportunity, whatever that opportunity is. I think if you change that, you're going to have to change the whole system. So I don't think it's
I think in terms of issues, right, there's a balance to be struck between what is there for oppositions, but for backbench members, on that basis also they have to be given
I suppose the point is that this isn't a conversation about being democratic to all members, this is about for an opposition, so it's about giving an opposition a proper opportunity to be able to do something. So it kind of, if we were having a conversation about should all members have an equal opportunity to something, then yes, a democratic system would be there. But that's not what the question is, so that's why my answer is like that.
From that point of view, Colin, I think part of the stuff is sometimes in trying to provide accountability and a democratic reflection, if you like, of all the people within the House, sometimes there's maybe certain things which we're pulling in opposite directions and supposed to be trying to find a level of balance in it. So I appreciate Militia was asked a while ago.
No, it's okay, Chair. Just that I thought that this was adequately covered just in recommendation 9, and that points us again to then in the direction of 4.
Okay. Nobody else have anything else to say on the procedural side of things? Okay. We'll move on to the third section, which is the recommendations 12 to 17, which are recommendations relating to financial matters. That's on pages 30 to 32. I know, I think particularly in Sinn Féin submissions, I think they had raised some concerns over the financial aspects of that. But anybody have any comments they want to make in relation to that?
Chair, could I say something about that?
Okay, yes, go ahead.
I think this is a test of how serious we would be about having not just a notional but an effective opposition. And quite clearly, as Mr. Rainey identified, you can't have an effective opposition without the wherewithal to mount an opposition, and that, whether we like it or not, comes from financial resources. So I think this is really the test of whether we're in the business of actually providing for an opposition or just ticking a box with no effect to it.
Jerry?
I'm actually, maybe Lisa wants in, but to my memory, the submission from ourselves was around that it's about incentive and disincentive. In other words, are you trying to give out so much resource that, you know, you're better off in opposition, or vice versa, that, you know, you dissuade people from opposition? That's the balance we were talking about. And I think that's the point. I don't know if Melissa wants to expand on that.
The issue then is, for example, that certainly if it's accepted that there needs to be additional resources,
yes, absolutely,
effectively resourced in that regard, I suppose it's just precisely where you pitch the quantum on that side of things. Alicia, I think you wanted in there just.
Just in that very point, financial assistance to political parties is described as that it shouldn't in any way, as Jerry Kelly has said there, be seen as an incentive to say to go into opposition per se because of financial reward, even though one would accept and recognise that it won't be cost neutral and having an opposition in the first instance, and that not being an incentive per se, nor should it be a disincentive, and that's very much our own party's position on that, and I think that should be taken on board as well.
Okay, Colin?
Yeah, just is there a suggested mechanism within it whereby the amount that you would get in opposition is proportionate to the size that you are, insofar as if you've got 3 ministers and you would get 3 ministerial salaries and 3 SPADs and 3 whatever, that obviously is a big amount to give up if it's set at just you only get like 100,000 or 50,000 or whatever it is, whereas if you're one party with 1 minister with 1 SPAD, then obviously going for that would be more incentive. Is it envisaged that it would be incremental depending on your size?
Well,
Just in the rationale and reasoning behind the recommendation is at page 119 of the pack. It's the addendum to the report, just the updated table and the related paragraph. So the current allowance under the FAP scheme, if there's no official opposition, is taking a party of 10 members, 10 seats, is 99,150, and where there is an official opposition, there's an increase of 24,940. So that was seen to be, you know, that would allow a party of 10 members, one fairly lower grade member of staff, and it was considered that you know, an additional 3 members might be reasonable, 3 members of staff to cover areas like research and policy advice and communications, and that's where the £100,000 per year for a party of 10 model came from in terms of £100,000 in addition to the existing provision under FAP. That would bring the figure then to the 199,150.
Jim, do you want in there, just, or?
Yeah, like the extra 100,000 equates in real terms to the cost of a SPAD within the executive, and you're talking about an opposition to mark every department, not just one. So I think, these scales, it's very, very modest indeed in comparison with the task that the opposition has to perform. I think financially they're at a considerable disadvantage, but therefore I don't think that what Mr. Rainey has proposed is in any way extravagant, far from it.
Any other comments? Kelly?
I was going to say that this was one of the proposals that Alliance had actually put forward that we considered on the basis of staff levels. And it was one of the things, if you want to have an effective opposition, then you would have access to a researcher, access to someone, almost like a whip's office support. And that's where the 3 staff came from. Obviously, more than 10 means more support would be provided, and it's based on that level of the current scheme that we have now on the numbers that parties have. So if you have an official opposition that comprises of one party with 2 members or 1 member, then it would be according. So as Colin was saying, is it based on size? Yes, it is. But the support that's provided is based on what you would actually need. And as Jim says, you could have a SPAD for each department, but what we're looking at is a researcher that would be working on behalf of the opposition. And
Yeah, Paul?
Yeah, I would find it strange that any party, no matter who it is, would be incentivised to go into opposition or stay in government through monetary value. I just don't see it. I just don't see how.
No.
I think we just need a well-supported opposition. And if we're going to have an opposition, I think Jim makes the point, if we're going to have an opposition, let's do it right. And again, I see nothing in these figures that scares me or makes me balk at them. I just think, because we are talking about staff support, it's not about financial reward. Even though you are getting that money, it's to pay people to do a job on behalf of. And if you're an official opposition, it's not really even on behalf of the party, it's on behalf of an official opposition, which is meant to be a good thing in democracy. So, yeah, I see nothing that scares me in these figures.
Okay, Jerry?
I mean, unless I'm missing, I don't think anybody's argued, but isn't it? I think Jim, in fairness to him, was arguing about putting it up. I wouldn't argue to reduce it, but I do think, to go back to some of the points earlier on about how many parties are in this, how that's divided out, and all of that, I think becomes an issue, but an issue which, in a way, was dealt with for the opposition, and then depending on how many's in it, then you'll have a difference, something which has to be worked between them. Because I don't think you can interfere with that either. That's up to them to do whatever way they do it.
Okay, I think seem to have reached a broad sort of consensus on that. Final section in terms of recommendations is recommendation 18, which is page 33 of the pack. Again, are there any particular views on that? Okay, if not, then I'll refer then page 34 of the pack, which is the conclusion section of the draft report, which I suppose puts a contextual relationship of the report.
Sorry, can I get back, Chair, on that? Recommendation 18, the official opposition.
Yeah, go ahead.
So how do you define adequate access to information? Is there something within the report that actually defines or sets a standard or a code of standard of what is to be expected from ministers and departments with regards to adequate access to information? Because obviously we all know the problems we've had trying to get information, and even when private members ask questions, there's an art form in answering them to make sure you don't get the information you ask for, quite frankly. So, is there an adequate standard with regards to adequate access to information?
Jerry?
Somebody else went in. Okay. It's a good question, but I was just trying to think it out, and this might be a silly question. See, if you're in opposition, are you in the committees? Are you still in
Yes.
committees?
Yeah.
You're still in committees, okay. So committees then have a standard, we can argue over the standard, but committees have a standard of information that they're supposed to get. Now, you'll hear within the Assembly quite often, committees and members of committees complaining they haven't got enough and all of that, but there is a standard set to do that. So I think that perhaps ends up a gauge instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, you know, in terms of information that you want or that ministers should give you.
Yeah.
Whereas I don't think you can. I find it difficult, and this is only off the top of my head to be honest with you, but I find it difficult to see a situation where you would give the opposition more information than you would give the committee, and especially since the opposition are going to be on the committees. So,
But
Not all are. This is what the issue
Could I
is.
just,
Yes, go ahead, Jim.
I just want to make one point about that. Obviously, the opposition are on committees, but they're very much a minority on the committees.
point I was going to make.
And therefore, I would have thought the way to handle this would be to have some sort of memorandum of understanding or protocol, if I dare use that word, between the opposition and the government, whereby the government would bind themselves to meet, say, the statutory obligation that's now in the Functioning of Government Act, whereby they have an obligation to provide requested information. So you would give the opposition some recourse to being able to seek and obtain information from the government, not beyond what a committee can obtain, but with the same compulsion that a committee can apply. So if they can't get it through committee, they can get it as their status as opposition.
Kelly, I think.
I was going to say that not all parties are on every committee, so therefore at this stage parties are closed off to the papers that are received by those committees.
Yes.
And it's that type of information sharing that would be required, because if you're going to be in opposition and say you don't have anyone on the executive office or whatever it may be, then you have to have access to that sort of information. But I agree with Jim. In 52 it says there, you know, that there be a protocol agreed through the executive or with the executive, like the Cabinet Office protocol that it talks about there, so that there is a wherewithal that agreement can be made. And as I would be expecting then that the code of conduct for ministers then would come into play, so that an opposition could form a complaint if they're not getting information. There's a pathway there for them to follow if they're not receiving the information that they require. But we need to open up committees.
Go ahead, Jerry.
oh, well, I think it's covered in fairness to what Kelly and Jim are saying. You're not saying going beyond what committees would get. So that was the only point, in my opinion, I was making. And there is a point, if you're not on certain committees, can
And
you
maybe
get
that's
that
a point,
information?
in terms of whenever we produce our final report, we can maybe be fleshed out a little bit on that to sort of clarify.
Chair, there is an example here on this Kelly's party. So Andrew Muir
Not on
was
finance.
the finance spokesperson, and I was on the finance, so was Jim on the finance committee, but Andrew wasn't. Andrew was taking part in debates, in many respects blind of the information that a committee member would have. And there is an unjustness there nearly. Now again, I know how the numbers work in a committee and the picks and selections and all of that, but if you want fulsome debate, you really want your MLAs, all MLAs taking part in that debate, to be fulsome of the information and facts. So there could be, is there even, so if an opposition had official spokespersons, should they then have the right to and they're not on a committee, which would be a bit of a nonsense anyway, because your spokesperson should be on the relevant scrutiny committee. But if they weren't, then should MLAs have the right to request committee packs as much as government official papers? So there's that question too. I don't know if it's covered.
I thought it shouldn't be beyond, I mean, particularly as now we're producing all the committee packs and simply electronically it's dropped into the number of the committee members, slightly widen the number of people receiving that. Anyway, Kelly and then Jerry.
I was just going to say on that point, this is the problem, you see, because papers are produced for the members of the committee. Even if on the day of that committee, then the papers are all made available to whoever we decide. The researcher, for instance, if there's one for the opposition, or the opposition spokesperson on that. It just means then that availability is there. I've never understood why all committee packs aren't just public anyway. But
Yes, because I mean, it's not as if, I can't think of particular occasions where there's been something that has been held that is so confidential in its nature. Now, obviously, if there are particular exceptional circumstances, Jerry and then Colin.
Well, I'm just saying that as we're talking, but I mean, that's a fair point. But it's not really to do with this. If you know what I mean, actually that point comes into a discussion now. Because it's your point, I mean, that we already have a situation, so I haven't thought about it. I mean, I would go away and think about that one, but I mean, I'm just trying to think, are there circumstances where there are certain things? You do have a difficulty in some committees where you end up trying to deal with an issue and people walk out of the committee and leak it anyway. So you have all of that situation. Would that increase? I don't know. But yeah, it's a fair point.
I think as they said in Yesminster, the ship of state's the only ship that leaks from the top down. In that regard on it. Colin?
Yeah, I knew there would be a day that me and Jim Allister would agree on a protocol, and that day has arrived much earlier than I thought it was going to. So, but I think that the development of a protocol would be appropriate. But in so doing,
Is it about obtaining something?
and to introduce the concept of that Irish Sea into the protocol, I would say in Scotland and Wales there are bound to be. Like I think Plaid or a particular size in Wales that they wouldn't be on every committee that's available. In Scotland there are some parties that wouldn't be on every committee. So is there a way of saying what they do to access it? Because there might be already...
I think as we seem to have reached a level of consensus, I mean, I know whenever you said that you and Jim had agreed on the protocol, there may be some of a strong religious dispensation at that point would be flicking
there's
through,
something to leak.
would be flicking through Revelations to see if there was some sort of portent of the end of the world at that stage on it.
The apocalypse. The horsemen of the apocalypse.
I think where we're going to handle this, I think there is a broad consensus on the principle of recommendation 18. I think that whenever we have the draft report, I think take the clerk and the staff can take on board what's been said, I suppose, as maybe a little bit of commentary around this as to the, I think we all accept the principle. Then I think the next step is the how we achieve this. I think we're all agreed on I think, broadly speaking, I don't think there's any great dissent among sort of the how, to be perfectly honest on it.
And Chair, the recommendation, Trevor Rainey saw this as a piece of work that the committee could take forward as part of its work programme, after the recommendation in principle is agreed.
Okay, then also then refer members to, I mentioned the conclusion section, which is largely, seems to me, it's page 34, largely putting a contextual relationship to this. Does anybody have any comments on that? Okay, so if not, we'll seek agreement that the staff update the working draft of the committee report in light of the opinions expressed today and present a draft copy for formal consideration. I appreciate today has been largely gaining a particular temperature around a lot of what's been said. So with the aim then for that formal consideration to take place at the next meeting on the 20th of October. And if the committee report is not agreed formally at the meeting on the 20th of October, it will be necessary to schedule a further meeting for the purpose of the committee its timetabled reporting to the Assembly on the outcome of the review. So there's a bit of an incentive to everybody to agree at the next meeting, because you can avoid an additional meeting. Okay, I think that concludes item 5. Move on to the next item, which I suppose is largely has been, I suppose, a bit of a scoping exercise. This is item 6 on the agenda, which is the designations and the appointment of the First Minister and Deputy First Minister, and refer members to pages 133 to 206 of the pack. Again, on the 12th of May, the ARC agreed that the strategic priority designations and the appointment, as well as its strategic priorities, designations and the appointment of the First and Deputy First Minister. Specifically, I suppose the AERC wished to consider 2 areas: scoping the removal of designations required, to be replaced with a requirement for weighted majority on defined key votes or in situations where reform petition of concern had worked, and secondly, the method of appointing the First and Deputy First Ministers, as well as the titles, to reflect the joint and equal nature of the office. So advising this point then, I'll hand over to Marie just to speak to this item.
Okay, in June, the committee considered the list of academics that research had identified who are experts in this area, agreed to request written evidence from them. So that request issued, and we've received evidence from three academics and then a group of academics, and they're included in your pack. So the committee might want to consider now whether we should seek the views of political parties on those two specific areas: scope and removal of designations, replace them with the weighted majorities, and the method of appointing First Minister and Deputy First Minister. We could copy those submissions to them and seek their views. And also the committee had spoken at one point about, once we got the written evidence, looking at whether they wanted to invite those expert witnesses, the Human Rights Commission and the De Borda Institute, who had received written evidence from previously, inviting them to give oral evidence.
Okay, first of all, then, any questions for Marie and what she said?
Could I just ask, given that we're approaching the end of the mandate, what time frame is the committee supposed to be working to in this regard? Are we really doing work which will fall into the legacy and uptake of the next committee?
Jim, I think the latter is probably correct. I think at this stage this is largely a preparation ground, a scoping exercise, because I don't think we'd be in a position to produce any sort of finished report. So it's, I suppose, providing the groundwork that can then, from a legacy point of view, then be taken on board by the next AERC and the next mandate.
I must say, I thought all the submissions were very interesting read, and I think they're quite informed about these issues. Could I just ask the clerk, were there experts invited who didn't respond?
There were a number of experts who didn't respond. I don't have those exact details, but I could find that out for you and circulate that information to the committee.
Is there, I mean, it may well be that this is an area where there's a little bit of, it is a little bit light on the ground in what might be described as expert witnesses, but I suppose from that point of view, if members have any other suggestions that they want to feed through to staff, somebody that they feel might be an expert that hasn't maybe been contacted as yet, that may not be anybody else, if they could feed that through. But just from that point of view, I think I suppose each of the points in turn, obviously members are content to note the written submissions from the expert witnesses so far. As Jim is indicating, it's an interesting read. Secondly, as a minimum, if do the members wish to invite the Human Rights Commission and the De Borda Institute to give oral evidence?
My inclination is, because I do think we're stepping into an area, all of this is very helpful, but really we're stepping into an area we nearly become a negotiating committee as opposed to the other committee. These are big issues which have been dealt with, and some people around the table have been dealing with them and all of that. My inclination would be to ask the political parties if they wish to put a submission in.
No,
I know you're coming to that, but I'm less inclined, because it's only asking two of them to come, and I mean their positions are there, and I think, I'm not sure if it's of any great help, but it's another meeting, which is not a problem, but I don't know if it's any great help. I mean, it's 2 out of how many, 6 was it, or something like that there. I was trying to find out the De Borda Institute. I know it's our old friend Peter, who's in charge of it, but is it him, or is it a series of people, or is it, do you know what the De Borda Institute is?
I only have the one contact name.
It's very good, but I suspect it's Peter.
It is Peter. I can't remember his surname now, but yeah, it is. It's Peter Emerson.
Peter Emerson.
Is I remember.
Sometimes a little bit conscious of, maybe not, and I don't want to be in any way casting any aspersions towards that, but I know at least one other context of somebody who then presents themselves as chair of a large group, and I've never heard anybody else other than.
And as it happens, I like Peter, I always did, but you know, we're talking about getting a wide range of information, and maybe the suggestion that we see if there's other people who want to put in.
Okay.
I think you're better. I mean, single academics have nothing against them either, but some of these are a group of academics who.
No, I think the wider we can draw the field in terms of submissions. Kelly and then Colin, I think.
I was going to say, we prioritise this as this committee to be taken forward in this mandate. I didn't think it was being kicked into the next mandate, because this issue could come up after the next election.
And you're right, but I think also it's not necessarily for this committee to deal with.
They were tasked with it. No, it's just if we can deal
I
with official
understand.
opposition,
We
then.
passed ourselves for it. But if any of this comes out, it'll end up in a negotiation, and it'll end up in a negotiation between the parties.
I would think
And that's what it'll end up.
I think that's quite likely in that regard. Colin?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I agree that it's likely to end up in a negotiation to try and determine it, because I think it was a negotiation behind closed doors that got us here. And I think that any light that we can shine on these issues is very important for people. I think they need to know. I think they need to understand this. I think it's something that the public don't fully understand, but I think it's something that they would benefit from understanding. And if we have already selected this as an issue for this committee to look at, I think it would be strange to have an area of investigation and then not take sort of oral evidence from people on it. So I'd be 100% happy that now I agree that we should maybe have a broader spectrum of people to choose from and be careful about who we choose from. And I think the points that Jerry makes correct.
From that point of view, if we can come back to, I think there's acceptance that there should be oral evidence sessions. I think we want to give a wee bit more thought just to from whom we take that, and we can get a broad range. Because again, in terms of oral evidence, and maybe to be fair, that's really where the responses have been, that if you're talking about effectively two bodies, or maybe really one body and one person, depending upon what way you interpret that, it does seem a little bit narrow in that regard. And maybe there's not a range of people in relation. Sorry, I'd also take on board, I assume everybody is comfortable with seeking, I think from also in parallel with that, seeking from the political parties across the spectrum of what their views are on this, and seeking written evidence on those areas from the political parties, and seeking that. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chair, can I just clarify what has been agreed? So we're going to go out to the political parties and ask for their views on the two elements under that topic, and consider then at a later stage who we're going to bring in to get oral evidence.
I think everybody's accepting that there should be oral evidence. I think there's maybe just a need. Now, again, this may be where theory diverges from the practical reality. I think it would be useful if we could have a few oral evidence sessions, if there could be a few widely drawn. But I suppose, to be fair, certainly off the top of my head, I can't think immediately of who those would be from. But I think we need to give a wee bit of thought just to...
I mean, just to be clear, I'm up for oral evidence, but I mean, let me declare I'm not an academic, but when reading the papers, and some of the papers are highly academic and highly theoretical, nothing wrong with that. And in fairness to even the theoretical, they're talking about, the practical applications. I mean, they argue against themselves and all of that's very helpful, but I just think it needs to be weighted in the two, because they can encapsulate in an oral thing. They talk for whatever it is, 15 minutes or something. You get a better idea because they go to the core of it. So I'm not arguing against oral, but I do think if you put it out to the parties and put them and let them put their submissions in first, or alongside, easy,
George, well, just to clarify then, I mean, is it possible maybe to get a paper for the next meeting of some suggestions of people that we might approach for this, and then there could be a range, and then we could select from that?
I think similarly, if any of the members have suggestions, I think that would be helpful as well.
Yeah.
I think, sorry, Chair, the last time it was research who identified the list of experts. We did go out to all of them. If you want, we could go back out to those who didn't respond and ask if they're now willing to respond. I could speak to research to see if they can identify anyone else in that field, and then if members themselves have any suggestions, to forward them to me. Okay.
Kelly?
I was just going to say the one people that we're not consulting with is the public. Do we want to consider at some stage putting forward a consultation out to the public on that?
In fairness to the point, I think, I'm only saying this from having read this stuff, I think you were nearly better bringing that down to a certain point where it is, if you like, more understandable. So absolutely no difficulty putting out the public, and eventually it'll go out there anyway, because it'll have to be done. But I think if you make it in a way more concise, because many of the public outside of those that are very much into this would read, those volumes and stuff,
Also then just inform members that on the provisional order paper, the 19th of October, there is a motion entitled Stability of Institutions and Referral to the AERC, which is a motion brought forward by the Alliance largely on this topic. Now obviously it will be different parties to take their views in connection with that, but I suppose just to check, there is obviously time limits in relation to it, but are members content that, I suppose, as far as we've reached with this issue, that that would also be in the debate reflected by myself as chair of the committee? Are members content with that?
Yep.
Okay. Move on then to the next item of business, which is the update on other strategic objectives, which is at pages 207 to 251 of the pack for relevant papers. So I'd remind members that the meeting on the 12th of May, ARC agreed its secondary strategic priorities, which is committee effectiveness and collaboration, and gender and diversity imbalances in the Assembly and the Executive. Again, I'll refer to Marie to speak to those.
Okay, the committee effectiveness and collaboration, there's been no progress made on that because the committee agreed to progress that issue once the CLG had reported in the autumn. It hasn't yet done that. The other work that was undertaken in relation to gender diversity imbalances in the Assembly, I had gone out to the Assembly Commission and other internal stakeholders to get an idea of the work that they were undertaking. So the stocktake document is included there for you. There's a huge amount of work that has been undertaken, and at least we've got to the point where that has been collated. In relation to the 2015 ARC report on women in politics in the Assembly, we went out to the parties asking for a progress report and the recommendations that were relevant to them. In that report, we received one response from the UUP, so the committee might want to go out and issue, despite reminders, there was only one response, so we might want to go out and issue a further reminder to the political parties. In relation to the stocktake, it was suggested previously that once that information had all been gathered together, we might want to consider commissioning comparative research on what's happening in political institutions in other jurisdictions, what they're doing. So it suggested that we ask for research or commission research on the initiatives that are happening in other jurisdictions to support women in Parliament and profile their work, what's being carried out to create gender-sensitive parliaments, how corporate bodies and other political institutions promote good relations, and the work that's being carried out by women caucuses in other parliaments. I mean, some of that research might be out there already, but it's a case of bringing it all together so we have that full body of research.
Okay, folks, I suppose then, first of all, I think I would like to commend the tremendous amount of work that's gone into the stocktake already in connection. I think it's useful if we do that. Obviously, suggest also we note the response from the UUP. I think the suggestion that, again, there's only been one response from political parties, that we put out a further reminder seems to be a fairly sensible approach to this. I presume members are content with that.
Yep.
And similarly then that it's been suggested as part of the action plan that commission sort of that comparative research. Again, are members content with that? Okay. Right, correspondence is the next item, and there is no correspondence.
No.
Might be thinking. Okay. Any other business? Does anybody have any other business they wish to raise? Okay. If there's no other business, move to the next item, which is the date and time of the next meeting of the ARC, which will take place on Wednesday, the 20th of October, in this room, in room 29, at 12:40. We hope anybody joining us by Starleaf will have ironed out any particular sound difficulties in the meantime. We hope, indeed. Okay, folks, then the meeting is then adjourned. Thank you.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29.